Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about creating a synergy between your different pressing exercises and how they impact size and strength in your pecs and triceps. And this is one of the first workouts. This is just me going way back, and it's probably not going to be out for months. Of one of the first workouts where I actually did pressing from 4 different angles in the same training session. And for a lot of my supplemental work after maxing, you guys saw me do like a medium grip flat bench, weighted dips, incline bench at a 45 degree, and then seated overhead press off pins. And this is one of the things that comes up a lot when we talk about complete muscular development as to why there is such a debate sometimes about things like triceps, right? Because you'll see a lot of people and a lot of experts will say, hey, this exercise or that, all these pressing movements don't always seem to hit the triceps very well, but then you see guys out there who do tons of pressing who have massive triceps, and then a lot of people who have lagging triceps. And I was that way for a long time, still that way to some extent. I've had to work on my triceps a lot, and it's one of the things we run into very frequently with triceps, for example, is we have 3 different heads of the tricep, right? And they serve different functions. In other words, we have heads of the tricep, the lateral and medial head, that are mostly involved with elbow extension. And then we have that big long head up on the top, right? Which is the largest of the 3 heads that has a shoulder extension component. Then we have the fact that on a lot of pressing movements, either the pecs or the delts tend to take a larger brunt of the work. And the stimulation, like we hook up EMGs, some of the heads of the tricep get very neglected, like the long head on pressing, even close grip pressing, even though we think of it as a very tricep dominant exercise. And one of the issues we run into is getting enough workload on the triceps, because a lot of times as we're doing these other movements for our volume work, our pecs or our delts will fatigue before the triceps have been fully reached, maybe their minimum effective volume that they need to grow. Maybe they haven't got enough total work and tension done, even though they did a lot. And I'm going to suggest a couple of things here. I'm going to suggest to you that if you're doing a variety of pressing, it puts a different emphasis on which primary muscles are involved. It will let the triceps get more work. In other words, your overhead pressing and your incline benching, for example, are not as impacted by dips. Meaning the primary mover, the muscles that work the most, right, tend to be different. Well, what do we mean? The lower pec gets worked enormously in the weighted dip. Look at the biomechanics, look at the EMG data on it. The upper chest and stuff gets worked and the front delts get worked, but they're taking a much, much smaller percentage of the load. They don't get nearly as fatigued as the lower chest. And then if you look at the angles involved, the dip actually does work all 3 heads of the tricep, but it's a little more focused on the lateral and medial heads, right? The same heads that we see on the close grip bench or even the medium grip bench, or really any flat bench. But here's the problem we run into. Okay. Closer grip benching works a lot of front delt, and it can really fatigue the front delts in regards to the incline benching and overhead pressing. But the dips don't do so much. Okay, they don't do as much. So in other words, if you do a bunch of dipping or even wider grip benching, right? What happens? Well, your front delts don't get worked quite as much. Say a close grip benching, particularly something like a dip or a really, really deep decline bench. Or it could be a wider grip bench with a really generous arch. The whole lower chest gets worked. The front delts don't get as fatigued. The upper chest doesn't get as fatigued. In other words, you can come in and do a ton of work on incline and overhead pressing afterwards, right? In this case, the triceps are then going to get a lot more work. They're going to get a lot more work. And why does that matter? Well, because if you look at the shoulder extension involved, look at the incline bench, how much more shoulder extension happens. Or even more so when I go over to the seated presses, because it's an overhead press. A lot more long head involvement happens. Okay, that's a whole nother head of the tricep that isn't getting worked as much on the other lifts that now gets more work in. And because the primary movers involved are different, what ends up happening? We're stronger. We have more strength remaining because we don't care about the lower chest. The lower chest just doesn't contribute to those exercises that much. The front delts do. Upper chest does. But those don't get worked on a decline bench or a dip anywhere near to the same degree. So this means, in other words, we can get a lot more total pressing work in. And if we're getting a lot more total pressing work in, what happens? Now our triceps are getting more work. It is then possible to reach effective volumes and effective workloads using big multi-joint movements, using presses. And we're working the different heads of the tricep. So we're creating a synergy here. In other words, if you come in and just try to do a bunch of closed grip benching, even though it's a decent tricep exercise, okay, it tends to just fatigue the front delts. If that's all you're doing, which isn't going to leave you a lot for things like overhead pressing, which might work the other head of the tricep more. Okay. But if we do a decline, or we do dips or something like that, it's a totally different beast, isn't it? So we create a synergy in which our triceps can be worked effectively. We worked a lot more effectively while still doing pressing. But in this case, we've now worked all three heads of the triceps more, and we've subjected them to more total work. Well, how does this carry over to chest development? Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. If we space these things out, what ends up happening? We hit different ratios, and different parts of the chest get worked more completely. Now, people will say, well, why would that matter for getting strong? Because all of it contributes. In other words, let's look at something like your bench press. Okay. Technically, the mid pecs do more of the work on the bench than some of the other parts of the pec. But what that affects is how much of them grow. In other words, how much is recruited in terms of total fatigue. If all you do is flat bench, you may not be getting enough work to all parts of the chest to make all of the chest grow. But all of the chest does contribute. In other words, if the lower part of the pec gets bigger and the upper pec gets bigger, those are still muscle fibers that contribute to a 1 rep max. Okay? In other words, bigger pecs will equal a bigger bench. Right? More pectoral muscle will equal a bigger bench no matter where that pectoral muscle is added. But the bench press itself may not, unless you just do enormous volumes of it, which you may not be able to recover from and may chew your shoulders up, may not fully develop all those parts of the pec. Okay? So by doing stuff like this, what do we end up doing? We end up making all parts of the pectoral and the tricep bigger and stronger, and the front delts. We do so in a way that creates a synergy, and they all carry over to each other in terms of strength. What's one of the other big perks? Less overuse, because we're doing less total work at the same joint angles and same angles all the time and same stress on the tendons. Our overuse injury risk goes down. We're more injury resistant. Okay, so what I'm suggesting here is taking exercises like this and carefully selecting ones that create a synergistic effect where the different exercises do feed into each other in terms of strength, that we can actually subject the muscles to more complete development and make ourselves more injury resistant. Okay, so there are ways to create synergy with the type of exercises that we do and the way that we balance them, by just being careful in your selection of variations and combining the right exercise movement patterns together. Alright guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.